Kevin Pearce grew up in a small town in Vermont in a family that spent almost every winter weekend on the slopes. His father was a glassblower who had built a career out of patience and precision, and that same patience seemed to run through his four sons. Kevin was the third of those boys, and from an early age, snowboarding wasn't just a hobby in his household. It was something closer to a family language. His parents ran a program that brought kids with disabilities onto the mountain, and Kevin's youngest brother, David, has Down syndrome. Growing up alongside David shaped Kevin in ways that would later become central to his story, teaching him early lessons about patience, joy, and resilience that had nothing to do with medals or competition. But on the mountain, Kevin was chasing something else entirely. He wanted to be the best. By his teenage years, it was clear he had a rare gift. Snowboarding in the late 90s and early 2000s was evolving fast, pushing bigger tricks, higher amplitude, and more technical spins than the sport had ever seen. Kevin thrived in that environment. He moved to Vermont's Stratton Mountain School, a training ground for elite young riders, and quickly built a reputation as someone who could not only keep up with the sport's biggest air, but push it further. By the mid-2000s, Kevin Pearce was one of the most talked about halfpipe riders in the world. He had style, he had progression, and he had the kind of natural charisma that made him a favorite with fans and sponsors alike. But there was one name that kept getting mentioned alongside his, over and over, in every headline and every conversation about the sport's future: Shaun White. White was already a snowboarding phenomenon, a two-time Olympic champion with a level of global fame no snowboarder had ever reached. Heading into the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, the story the media wanted to tell was simple and irresistible: an up-and-coming rival finally ready to dethrone the sport's biggest star. Kevin had beaten White at a Grand Prix event in the lead-up to the Games, landing a trick combination that no one else in the world was doing at that level, including a double cork that put him at the absolute cutting edge of halfpipe riding. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't just about a talented young rider anymore, it was about a changing of the guard. Kevin embraced that pressure. He trained relentlessly at Park City Mountain in Utah, refining tricks that lived right at the edge of what was physically possible on a snowboard. Halfpipe riding at that level is a strange kind of math. Every added rotation, every extra twist, buys you higher scores and more attention, but it also shrinks your margin for error to almost nothing. Athletes were flying 18 to 20 feet above the lip of the pipe, spinning multiple times in the air, landing on hard-packed snow with almost no room to correct a mistake mid-flight. On December 31st, 2009, just weeks before the Vancouver Olympics, Kevin was training on that same halfpipe in Park City, working on a trick called the cab double cork 1260, a maneuver that combined multiple flips with more than 3 full rotations. It was the kind of trick that could win him a gold medal. It was also the kind of trick that left absolutely no room for error. He came up short. Kevin's face hit the lip of the pipe at full speed. He suffered a traumatic brain injury so severe that doctors weren't sure, in those first critical hours, whether he would survive it. He was airlifted to a hospital, then transferred to a specialized trauma center, placed in an induced coma while his brain swelled dangerously inside his skull. The young man who had been on the cusp of Olympic glory was now fighting simply to open his eyes again. His family rushed to his side. His brothers, his parents, the tight-knit Vermont community that had watched him grow up on that mountain, all of them converged around a hospital bed, uncertain what recovery, if any, would look like. For weeks, even speaking felt like an impossible milestone. His vision was damaged. His memory was fractured. The simplest tasks, walking across a room, holding a fork, recalling a conversation from 5 minutes earlier, had to be relearned from scratch. This is the part of Kevin Pearce's story that separates him from almost every other injury narrative in sports. He didn't get better in a dramatic training montage. He got better in agonizingly small steps over years, not months. Cognitive therapy, vision therapy, physical therapy, endless repetition just to regain skills most of us never think twice about. And through it all, his brother David was there. Anyone who has seen footage of the two brothers together during Kevin's recovery understands why David became such a central figure in his story. David, who had spent his whole life being underestimated because of his Down syndrome, suddenly found himself in the unexpected position of being a source of strength for his older brother. He didn't treat Kevin like a fallen athlete or a fragile patient. He treated him like his brother, the same brother he'd always had, cheering him on with an uncomplicated, relentless positivity that cut straight through the fear surrounding Kevin's recovery. Kevin has said, many times since, that David taught him more about resilience, during that period than anyone else in his life. Not through advice or wisdom in the traditional sense, but simply by modeling what it looks like to face the world with joy, despite being told, again and again throughout his own life, what he supposedly couldn't do. As Kevin's recovery progressed, he faced an agonizing question that every high-level athlete with a brain injury eventually confronts. Could he ever ride again? For a long time, the answer he wanted to hear was yes. He worked toward a comeback, testing his balance, his reaction time, his ability to process the fast-moving world of snowboarding safely. But doctors were clear about the risks. A second serious brain injury, especially one suffered so soon after the first, could be catastrophic, potentially fatal. Eventually, Kevin made the decision to step away from competitive riding for good. For most elite athletes, walking away from the sport that defined their identity would be devastating enough on its own. Kevin had to do it while still relearning how to see clearly, how to hold a conversation, how to live independently. But instead of disappearing from public life, he chose to turn his story into something useful for other people. Kevin became a vocal advocate for brain injury awareness, working to change how the action sports world approached head trauma and safety. He and his brother Adam eventually founded a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting people living with traumatic brain injuries, offering resources like yoga and meditation programs designed specifically for survivors, drawing on lessons Kevin had learned firsthand about slow, patient rehabilitation. His story reached an even wider audience through a documentary that followed his journey from championship contender to injury survivor. The film didn't shy away from the hardest parts, the fights with his family over whether he should attempt a comeback, the frustration and grief buried beneath his public optimism, the fear that came with facing a life no longer built around the one thing he'd always been best at. It premiered to critical acclaim and introduced Kevin Pearce's story to people who had never followed snowboarding at all, turning him into a symbol of resilience far beyond the world of winter sports. What makes Kevin's story so compelling is not just the crash itself, dramatic as it was. It's everything that came after. It's the image of a brother with Down syndrome becoming the emotional anchor for an Olympic hopeful. It's the slow, unglamorous, deeply human work of relearning how to live. It's the decision to walk away from a dream at its absolute peak. Not because he wanted to, but because continuing might have cost him his life. And it's what he built afterward, turning personal tragedy into a platform that has helped countless other survivors feel less alone. Kevin Pearce never won that Olympic medal everyone expected him to chase in 2010. But somewhere along the way, his story became bigger than any medal ever could have been. It became a story about what happens when everything you've built your identity around is suddenly taken away, and what it takes to build a new identity in its place, one small step at a time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring biographies from the world of extreme sports.